You know, I wanted to take the 15 minutes that I had today to talk about the creative process with working with a composer on a film, and kind of what makes a film feel modern and what makes it feel contemporary. And I feel like what I wanted to focus on was the difference between degrees of intentionality in music in film. It sounds maybe a little more complicated than it really is, but on the one end of the spectrum, you have an animated Pixar film or a film that perhaps John Williams will write the music to, a traditional old school film score where the music is written to the film. So the film is the inspiration for that music. All the way on the other side of the spectrum, you have found music. You have music, and there are incredible examples of all of this, but 2001: A Space Odyssey or Apocalypse Now. There are lots of examples of music that has existed prior to being married to the film that it ends up in. And it frequently can end up like, you know, peanut butter and chocolate, like it's total magic. You would have never thought that that combo would work, but watching bombs drop, you know, in Vietnam and hearing, you know, it's a beautiful Louis Armstrong singing, it can be incredibly powerful. But I think a lot of what makes a film contemporary today is the difference between music that was written for a film and music that was written to a film. So while I might have previously talked about, say, a Pixar animated film where each action and each bit of the narrative is scored, today what you come across a lot is scores that are written by bands, by classical composers, and they're written for the film but not necessarily to the film. And I think some of the most interesting current examples in film music come from that. And I think it's important as filmmakers to think about what is the best process to go by when I'm working with my music people. If I'm going to work with a band that I'm a fan of, but they are not necessarily film composers, what's the best creative process? How am I going to get the most out of this band? Or if it's a classical composer who has amazing ideas, but who isn't necessarily one for beats and clicks and tempo mapping and really hitting bells and whistles in a film score, what are your other options? And I brought along a couple clips that I wanted to play for you. The first, I guess, would be from great film, Children of Men. He has a new film coming out called Gravity. This is an amazing film. I'm sure you've probably seen it, or hopefully you have. And here's a great example of a score that, in the words of the director, he says that Taverner's score, Fragments of a Prayer, was really a spiritual comment rather than narrative support. The track features mezzo-soprano Sarah Connolly and is used as a powerful motif. Unlike most composers, Taverner chose not to score the piece to the film, but to the screenplay instead. So here's that middle zone in action. He's not just writing a piece of music at some point in his life that inspires him while looking at a lake, and then it ends up in a film, and Shazam, that's an amazing combination. But he's also not looking at the finished film and writing to the beats and the narrative beats and the structure of the film. Let's take a look at this.
It's me.
Uh-oh, hold on. Sorry.
It's me.
What?
You got me.
Bud.
No. I'm fine. Keep her close, Key. Whatever happens, whatever they say, you keep her close. It's gonna be okay. She's probably got wind out. Put her on your shoulder. Just tap her back. Gently. Gently.
Not me.
There you go.
So for the sake of just being able to cover a couple of examples, that's a great example of a piece of music that may never have actually made it into that film if a composer had been looking at that particular bit of film and writing to it. Instead, he was writing to the ideas of the film and the spirituality that they wanted to touch on in the film. I just think by the time you get to that point in that film and you see that, and it's incredibly moving, incredibly. You know, the next example that I wanted to play for you is a good example of a composer that everybody thinks of as being Mr. Intentional, and every idea is supported and thought through. And I was very interested to come across this clip of one of my heroes, John Williams, discussing how he worked with Steven Spielberg on War of the Worlds. And this is very interesting.
John did not get to see the picture before he began writing the music. This has never happened to us before. John is writing the music in a semi-vacuum.
Certainly a very memorable image is when Ray's character comes out of the destroyed house and he sees the crashed plane there. And that music was not intended to be there. That music was part of what I call the epilogue, which comes at the very end of the end credit of the film. And Stephen came and he said, you know, the trumpet trio, where the trumpets are playing. Yes, where it's the beginning and the middle of that epilogue. He said, how do you think it would be for when Ray comes out and he sees the plane?
So great example of music that John Williams never intended to go to that scene, but the kind of malleability, that creative process, that being malleable can really yield an incredible result. I think the best recent example that I can think of for music that was somewhat found, but then at the same time modified for the score, would be There Will Be Blood. And I can show you a quick clip of this, and then I kind of want to open things up for questions a bit, and if you have any questions. Now the story behind this, just if any of you don't know it, is when P.T. Anderson is making this film, he came across the classical music, or the more kind of concert-oriented music that Johnny Greenwood from Radiohead that he composed. And famously, P.T. Anderson does this in so many movies and to such great effect. Magnolia, a lot of these films. This found music, or this music that's written around the idea of the film, or maybe even prior to the film, that ends up being so incredible in the film. So you get the idea. We can bring up the lights, please. You know, the point being that here's this music that ended up gelling perfectly with the film, and actually, I don't know if anyone else who saw the film felt this, kind of felt like almost the score was played particularly loudly in that film, but the filmmaker is, you know, P.T. Anderson is finding a way to utilize something that previously existed for the film. So I'd love to open it up for questions or two if we have enough time. I don't know where my timekeeper is. We have 5 minutes left? Okay, so just to recap very quickly before, if you have any questions, the main point of what I wanted to kind of demonstrate and show to you today was that music for film, that when you go about trying to find what type of music is going to work best in your film or for your film, I think that trying to figure out what the best creative process is is really the most important first step that you can choose, and that choosing the wrong one can actually be deadly, and you can end up having a very difficult time with music if you're not working with your composer or with your artist or with your music supervisor, kind of trying to get the right mix there. Anyway, yeah, sure.
Do you find that a lot of directors are thinking in the meta way that you're talking about in terms of like a larger?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I wanted to play a Blue Valentine clip because I kind of feel like I bet certain directors sit down and they just go, I just love the music of this band or of this artist, and if you could sit down and have, you know, a meal with them and talk about the film and say, this is really what we're trying to express, these are who my characters are, this is, you know, that with a fantastic music editor can be a great combination. Let an artist go, and in the way that they naturally create music, not necessarily to bars and beats, to picture, they can come up with something kind of incredible that way. But yeah, I think directors are clued into that. I mean, one of my favorite scores, I remember watching Friday Night Lights, and I was blown away. Explosions in the sky. I was like, my hat goes off to you. And I don't know that a film composer would have actually gone that route. I think it took a band mentality to kind of bring that music about. Anyway, anyone else? Questions? Yeah.
I'm a music composer.
Okay.
And probably one of the only ones in the area.
Okay.
I did the music for Dinosaur 13 that's in the documentary
Okay.
thing here at the IFB. And I'm from Columbus, Ohio, and I had a personal, you know, my boyhood friend directed the film, so I have a relationship with him there. But how do you go about making new relationships with new filmmakers? Do they come to you based on your...
It's a mixture. It's a mixture. I mean, honestly, I did an IFP lab earlier in the year and had been asked to kind of screen one of the films in progress and saw it and was actually really blown away and moved by it. And so I talked to the filmmaker and said, you know, I'd love to work on your film. So that project came about that way. Other projects come about because somebody sees, or they hear, in this case, the work that you're doing, and then they reach out to you. And typically you have an agent, and I have an agent, and so when people are interested, that's the route that they go. But yeah, the networking part of it is a very, I think anyone who's successful in the business has their own way of being actually successful at that part of the business of networking. And meeting, you know, like-minded individuals, like-minded creatives. I actually think that's the most important thing. Find people whose work you like, and then let them know about you. You know, because that'll be a good mix. Yeah?
When you're having a conversation with the director and they get stumped on how they want to express that
right.
music, and they start relying on examples, you know, it sounds like this, or this band, that band, or this composer as they did in this film. Have you found any methods to kind of move away from that, you know, referential understanding?
It's very difficult. I mean, I think everybody deals with it. I've heard of it happening all the way up on big, large-scale movies with huge names. You know, that temp love can be very, very difficult. And it happens mostly, I would say, in film and then in television commercials. But with film, you know, as a composer, I know that there's some composers, for instance, that won't watch a film with somebody else's temp in it. And then, surprise, surprise, you sometimes see a film by a composer and it sounds like his last score, and that might have been because they temped his score in and said, we love your work, and why, okay, if you like my work, and then they redo the work. I feel like it's, you have to be very politically sensitive to how you engage people away from temp. If you, ultimately, a director should be hiring a composer or a band or to do what they do, not to do what somebody else does. So if they're asking you to sound more like Skrillex, it's like you should hire Skrillex because that's how you're going to get that sound. And then you do, and then Spring Breakers sounds awesome, you know. But I think that at the end of the day, there has to be that you're hiring, you know, your composer to do, you know, his or her thing, or you're hiring that band to do their thing. And that was kind of part of the reason of highlighting the continuum between composing to picture, for picture, and then music that just already exists. Like, hey, come check out my music. Boom. Time up. I think this is where they cue the studio band, and I exit stage left with a gorgeous model. Thank you very much.